There is a small marsh in a quiet suburb south of St. Paul, a paved loop, some cattails, a pond, a few benches. On a map it looks like nothing at all, but walk it slowly and you begin to notice that the ground here tilts towards something. Two great rivers meet a short distance from this trail, and that meeting place is one of the most important pieces of land in North America. This is Friendly Marsh Park, and it sits at the edge of a story far larger than itself. Friendly Marsh Park lies in Mendota Heights in Dakota County, Minnesota, on the bluff country south of the Mississippi River. The park is a little under 47 acres, with a loop trail of roughly 2 miles that circles a marsh and a pond. It is a neighborhood park, the kind of place people walk their dogs in the evening. Just to the north, below the bluff, the Minnesota River empties into the Mississippi. That confluence is the reason this whole landscape exists as it does. We walked this loop in the middle of August when a Minnesota marsh is at its thickest and loudest. The cattails stand higher than a person. The air is heavy. Dragonflies patrol the open water in the middle of the pond. It is the season when everything green has already won and the marsh has closed over itself like a lid. There is nothing dramatic here. No summit, no waterfall. Just a wet place held onto in the middle of a suburb which is itself a small miracle. To understand this ground, we have to go very far back. Around 450 million years ago, in the Ordovician period, this part of the continent lay under a warm, shallow sea, much closer to the equator than it is now. Sand settled into beaches. Lime mud and the shells of sea creatures piled up on the bottom. Over time, those layers hardened into the rock that still lies beneath the Twin Cities, the St. Peter sandstone, and above it the Platteville limestone. That old sea floor is the foundation of everything we are walking on. The Platteville limestone forms a hard cap, often only about 12 feet thick, sitting on much softer sandstone underneath. It is a strange arrangement, a lid of stone over a bed of loose sand, and it explains the shape of the river valleys nearby. Where the limestone holds, you get cliffs and bluffs. Where water gets underneath it and washes the sand out, the limestone breaks away in slabs. Then came the ice. During the last glaciation, lobes of the Laurentide ice sheet pushed down over Minnesota again and again, grinding the surface flat, scraping soil and rock, and leaving behind till in gravel and long, low ridges of debris. The marsh basins that dot this whole region are largely a gift of that ice. Depressions were scooped out or left where buried blocks of ice slowly melted, and when the glaciers withdrew, water filled the hollows. Minnesota is a land of wetlands because it was a land of ice. That is really the answer to why a marsh sits here at all. This is young ground, only recently released from the ice in geological terms, and it has not yet learned to drain properly. Water collects in low spots because the low spots have not been carved out by rivers yet. Every pond and slough and bog across this state is, in some sense, an unfinished piece of drainage. The marsh in front of us is the ice sheet still finishing its work. And then there was a flood almost beyond imagining. As the ice sheet melted back, an enormous lake formed along its edge, Lake Agassiz, at times larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined. Around 13,500 years ago, it overtopped its southern rim and burst out. The torrent, which geologists call Glacial River Warren, poured across Minnesota for thousands of years and carved the huge valley that the modest Minnesota River wanders through today. This is one of the quiet oddities of Minnesota. If you stand above the Minnesota River, you are looking at a valley wildly out of proportion to the river inside it. The valley was cut by a flood, and the river that lives there now is a leftover. River Warren also deepened the Mississippi Gorge below the confluence and left behind the 200-foot bluffs that define this whole stretch of country, including the high ground we are walking on. Where those two valleys join just north of here is a place the Dakota call Bdote. The word means roughly where two waters come together. On a map, it is simply the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers. In Dakota understanding, it is something else entirely. It is the center. It is the place of origin, the heart of the homeland, a sacred site. The town of Mendota, and by extension Mendota Heights, takes its very name from that Dakota word. So the name on the sign at the edge of this suburb is a Dakota word, slightly worn down by English. Mendota from Bdote from Mdote. Dakota County likewise. The names in this county are not decoration. They are the surface of an older and continuous presence. This is Dakota Homeland, and it has been Dakota Homeland for a very long time, long before any of the boundaries, the plats, the cul-de-sacs, and the park signs that surround this marsh today. Many Dakota people describe Bdote as the place where the people came into being. In that account, the spirits traveled down the Spirit Road, the band of stars we call the Milky Way, and the first people were formed from the earth at the meeting of the waters. It is not a story to be told casually by outsiders, and we will not embroider it. What matters for a walk like this one is simply to understand where you are standing. For many Dakota, this is the center of the world. It is important to say this in the present tense. The Dakota are not a chapter that closed. There are 4 federally recognized Dakota communities in Minnesota today, at Lower Sioux, Upper Sioux, Prairie Island, and Shakopee Mdewa Canton. And here in Mendota itself, the Mendota Mdewa Canton Dakota Tribal Community, formed in 1997, holds language classes, hosts an annual WASSAPI, works to protect sacred sites, and has spent decades pressing for federal recognition it has not yet been granted. A short distance from this marsh rises a hill the Dakota call Oheyawahi, sometimes written Oheyawahi, meaning a sacred place much visited. The hill people go to for burials. Settlers called it Pilot Knob because riverboat crews used it to navigate. It is a burial ground and a place of ceremony. In 2002, a developer proposed high-density housing on 27 acres of it, and the fight that followed produced the Pilot Knob Preservation Association and eventually protection. That campaign worked. The Trust for Public Land bought land on the hill in 2005 and passed it to the city, with money from the state, from Dakota County, and from the Preservation Association. Restoration of native prairie and oak savanna began in 2006 and continues. In 2017, the site was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It is worth remembering on a suburban trail that even the green spaces here had to be argued for, sometimes bitterly. The dispossession of this place has a documentable beginning. In September 1805, a young Army lieutenant named Zebulon Pike came up the Mississippi and met Dakota leaders at the Confluence. He wanted land for military posts, including a tract right here at Bdote. The document he produced is a mess. He had no authorization from the president to negotiate anything. Of the 7 Dakota leaders present, only 2 made marks on it. The boundaries of the land were never actually specified. It gets worse. Pike valued the land at $200,000, but no sum was written into the text. He handed over gifts worth around $200. The Senate later approved a payment of $2,000, and Thomas Jefferson never issued the proclamation that would normally have made it official. By the ordinary standards of the time, the agreement was invalid. The United States proceeded as though it were binding anyway, and built a fort on the strength of it. Troops arrived in 1819 under Lieutenant Colonel Henry Leavenworth, and construction of the stone fort began the following year. It was completed in 1825 and named for Colonel Josiah Snelling. It stands on the bluff directly above Bdote, looking down on the Confluence, which is exactly the point. A fort is a statement about who controls a river. From that limestone wall, the United States could watch every canoe, every keelboat, and eventually every steamboat that came to the meeting of the waters. The fort did not come alone. Around it grew a trading economy that had been running in this region for well over a century, an economy built on beaver, muskrat, and marten, on credit extended to native hunters, and on debts that were later collected in land. The marsh we are circling would have been, in that world, a working landscape. Muskrat country. The animals that live in a place like this were once the currency of an entire continent. Just across the river from the fort at Mendota, the American Fur Company established a regional headquarters. Fur bales, ledgers, canoes, ox carts. The village that grew there is among the oldest continuous settlements of European Americans in Minnesota. A trader named Alexis Bailey built log buildings there to trade furs in 1826. The Catholic parish of St. Peter dates to 1840, and its stone church, built in 1853, is the oldest church in continuous use in the state. In 1836, the company's young regional manager, Henry Hastings Sibley, contracted a stonemason named John Muller to build him a house out of local limestone, hand-hewn timber, mud, and grass. It still stands in Mendota. It served as the company's regional headquarters from 1836 to 1842 and is often called the oldest private residence in Minnesota. It was rescued from ruin in 1910 by the Daughters of the American Revolution and opened to the public that June. Sibley is the hinge of this story. He was a fur trader, then a territorial delegate to Congress, then the first governor of the state of Minnesota, and later the general who commanded troops against the Dakota. The same man in the same lifetime. That progression from company ledger to treaty table to military command is not a coincidence. It is the machinery by which a homeland was converted into real estate, and it ran straight through the village below this bluff. On the 5th of August, 1851, on the bluff at Pilot Knob, within sight of Fort Snelling, the Treaty of Mendota was signed. The Mdewakanton and Wapikute Dakota gave up their claim to a vast area of southern Minnesota and agreed to move to a narrow reservation along the Minnesota River. Together with the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed weeks earlier, the Dakota ceded on the order of tens of millions of acres. Traders' debts were deducted from the payments. It is worth pausing on the geography. The treaty that opened southern Minnesota to settlement was signed on a sacred Dakota burial hill, a few minutes' walk from where we are standing, in full view of the fort that enforced it. The land under this marsh, under these houses, under this parking lot, changed hands in that transaction. Every quiet suburban street in Mendota Heights is downstream of that August afternoon, whether anyone on it knows the date or not. The promised payments were late, or short, or swallowed by traders. People went hungry. In August 1862, war broke out along the Minnesota River. It was brutal and it ended badly for the Dakota. On the 26th of December 1862, 38 Dakota men were hanged at Mankato, the largest one-day mass execution in United States history. And that winter, roughly 1,600 Dakota, mostly women, children, and elders, were held in an internment camp on the river flat below Fort Snelling. They had been marched there. Disease moved through the camp. Estimates of the dead that winter run into the hundreds. Historians and Dakota people alike often call it what it was, a concentration camp. It sat at Bdote. The place many Dakota understand as the origin of their people became the place where their people were confined and where many of them died. There is no way to walk this ground honestly without carrying that. It is a few miles from this bench. In the spring of 1863, Congress abrogated the treaties, and Dakota people were exiled from Minnesota. Around 1,300 were loaded onto steamboats and shipped to the Crow Creek Reservation in Dakota Territory. Many died on the way. In the first 6 months at Crow Creek, more than 200 died, most of them children. And yet, within a decade, Dakota families began quietly returning to their homeland in small groups, rebuilding communities near Morton, Granite Falls, Prior Lake, and Prairie Island. They are still here. Which brings us slowly to the marsh. The land around Bdote was surveyed and sold, and Mendota Township was organized in 1858, the year Minnesota became a state. For a century afterwards, this was farm country, dairy herds and truck farms feeding St. Paul across the river. The bluff was rural. The marsh we are walking would have been a wet spot in someone's back 40, useful for muskrat and ducks and not much else. Then came the post-war suburban wave. In February 1956, residents of what remained of Mendota Township voted to incorporate as the village of Mendota Heights, and in 1974 it became a city. Most of the housing here went up between 1960 and 1990, an upscale bedroom community on the bluff above the river. Fields became subdivisions, woodlots became yards, and the low, wet places, the ones that had been nuisances to farmers, became obstacles to developers. Across Minnesota, the arithmetic is stark. The state has lost roughly half of the wetlands it had before European settlement, drained and filled and tiled for farming and for building, and in some regions the loss runs above 90%. A wetland was a thing to be fixed. Then, gradually, the science caught up, and in 1991 the legislature passed the Wetland Conservation Act, one of the most sweeping wetland protection laws in the country, with a stated goal of no net loss. That is the context for a park like this one. A marsh in a wealthy suburb, encircled by a paved trail, is not an accident of neglect. It is the result of a change of mind that happened across a generation, in which a swamp stopped being a defect and started being an asset. Somebody, at some point, drew a line around this water and said it stays. And so we get to walk here in the late summer and listen to it. And a marsh does real work. Water that runs off streets and lawns and roofs arrives here carrying sediment, nitrogen, phosphorus, and whatever else the neighborhood has shed. In the still water it slows down. Particles drop out. Plants take up nutrients that would otherwise feed algae blooms further downstream. Wetlands also hold storm water and release it gradually, which is not glamorous, but it is the difference between a wet basement and a dry one. The plant doing most of the visible work is the cattail. Its dense stands are the architecture of the whole system. Cattails form a foundation of the marsh food web, their seeds and stems and rhizomes feeding birds and mammals, their decomposing remains feeding snails and insects and worms in the mud. Their thickets are also cover. If you want to understand a marsh, understand that most of the animals living in it are inside those green walls, unseen. Which is why the sound of a marsh is mostly the sound of things you cannot see. In summer, the red-winged blackbird owns this place. The males perch on the old dry cattail stalks, flare those scarlet shoulder patches, and shout at everything that comes near. They lash their nests to standing cattails, low over the water. It is a small, ferocious, extremely confident bird, and it is the unmistakable voice of a northern marsh in August. Two other residents define the place. The great blue heron stalks the shallow edges on those absurd legs, motionless for long stretches, then astonishingly fast. And the muskrat lives here in the truest sense. It eats cattail rhizomes, and it builds its winter lodge out of cattail leaves, piled into a dome above the ice. The muskrat literally eats its house and lives in its dinner. In winter, those mounds are often the only thing breaking the flat white. By mid-August, the marsh is at maximum. The cattail heads have gone brown and firm. The blackbirds are quieter than they were in May, the territorial fighting long over. Frogs go silent as you pass and start again behind you. Somewhere out there, the herons are still working the edges. It is an ordinary green afternoon in a suburb in Dakota County, and it is also a floodplain of a vanished glacial river at the edge of a sacred confluence. Two miles closes the loop and you are back at the road in under an hour. That is the whole hike. Nobody would call it an adventure, but there is something worth practicing in a place like this, which is the habit of asking what happened here, of not accepting that a place is small just because it is close and familiar. The marsh does not announce any of this. You have to bring the question with you. So this is Friendly Marsh Park. A pond, a loop, a wall of cattails, and beneath it 450 million years of sea floor, a glacier, a flood, and the origin place of the Dakota people a few miles down the bluff. It is worth walking with your eyes open. It is worth knowing whose homeland you are on. Thank you for watching. Follow for more trails of the world.